I've always been interested in the outdoors. Around the age of 12, I began watching shows like Man vs. Wild on TV, and I thought the idea of being on my own in the wilderness would be an adventure and make me an interesting person with a unique skill set. Just thinking about making a shelter and having to find food and water, all the while navigating the dangers of the wilderness, was enough to keep me up for hours watching wilderness survival videos on YouTube. When I got a little older, I started using my birthday money to buy gear like hatchets and knives and other tools of the sort. At the time, my family lived in a developing neighborhood that wasn't far from town. We did, however, live at the edge of a woods that stretched deep into Mississippi's south. By day, it was any normal woods, vibrant and full of life, almost welcoming in a way. I had taken many walks through the woods and pretended as if I was surviving a brutish winter, alone in the wilderness, or trying to navigate to the nearest water source during a blistering summer. I only had one incident where I was afraid, and it turned out to just be a dog wandering the woods. By night, however, the landscape changed into a hellish scene of dancing shadows and creatures swimming in the pools of darkness. The thick canopy cut out most of the moonlight, making the floor an ocean of black. Flashlights were only marginally helpful. It seemed as if they barely sliced through a thin stream of the darkness before being swallowed by the foliage. My juvenile mind made matters worse. Every time I looked out into the sea of shadows, I could swear I saw haunting figures dancing among the trees. Most of it was just that, however, tricks played on my eyes by the mind of a scared child. The fear of the night plagued me, since all I wanted to do was prove myself in the wilderness. A few years went by, with them coming the changes of adolescence. I grew taller, my voice got deeper, and I turned to the internet for tips when talking to girls. One thing didn't change, however: my interest in the outdoors. It was sometime around my junior year of high school when I decided it was time for my first overnight adventure. I felt like I had enough knowledge on hiking and survival to fill a small book. Matter of fact, I had read more than one book on the topic. The only problem with the plan was the same reason I hadn't yet went camping in the woods in the first place. I was still deathly afraid of it after dark. I was a little scared of the dark anyways, but not unnaturally so. The thing I feared most was being alone in the darkness with whatever lurked out there. Most people mocked me for my fear. There aren't very many predators in Mississippi that people needed to worry about. We do have some black bear and the occasional rabid dog or bobcat, but those creatures would mostly avoid people unless they're cornered. I wasn't too worried about those creatures anyways. What scared me were the legends of heinous monsters that exist in the hours between dusk and dawn. Most people called them just that, however. Just legends. Stories told around campfires to scare your friends, or myths exploited by the movie industry. The older I got, the easier it was for me to believe that. I felt sure that I was at the time in my life where I needed to face my irrational fears. That decision was the worst mistake of my life. My birthday is October 19th, and that year I asked my friend Adrian to accompany me on my overnight camping trip in the woods. He was just your normal high school kid, average build with light blonde hair, which was usually unkempt, and an oddly freckled face. He had been known to embellish his stories a bit, usually nothing too crazy though. He agreed to my plans without hesitation. If he had any fear for the wilderness, he didn't show it. We planned to meet at my place that Friday. Once we got our gear ready, we would hike down a trail that started behind my house and follow it until it ended about half a mile into the woods. After that, we would hike until late evening and set up camp. He agreed readily, and I gave him an idea of what to bring. The excitement of finally planning to go on a real camping trip quickly doused any apprehensions I held for the woods at that time. After what felt like a million years, Friday finally rolled around. The day started off pretty normal. Since it was my birthday, my parents let me stay home from school to prepare for my excursion. They knew how much it meant to me. I had a bag packed with all the things I wanted to bring. Items like a mess kit for cooking over the fire, a change of clothes, a roomy tent that I had gotten a while back, and little survival tools that I had collected over time. Before setting off to meet Adrian, my mother gave me a box that had obviously come from Amazon. It was a cool little hatchet she had bought for my birthday. It was marketed as a zombie survival weapon with multiple functions. I had other tools of the sort, but this one was pretty neat, and since my mother had given it to me, I strapped it to my bag and called Adrian to see where he was at. Not long after that, my plans for the fun evening of hiking came crashing down. He told me he was having second thoughts about the trip and had decided not to go. This news obviously had me irritated with him and kind of upset. My best friend was backing out on me. He told me his parents thought it wasn't a good idea to be roaming the woods at night. Upon hearing this, I hung up abruptly. If Adrian didn't want to go, that was fine by me, I decided. He really wasn't my favorite person at the moment. Pushing the thought to the back of my mind, I set off to the edge of the woods. Standing at the mouth of the trail I had made over the years, the first trickles of fear entered my mind again. I was now planning to trek into the forest on my own, with nothing but a few marshmallows to defend myself with. No, I told myself, I'm not backing out now. With one final surge of confidence, I started the trail. After starting the hike, my fear subsided. The cool October air was comforting, as was the smell of fall and the many evergreen trees in the area. I hiked on, oblivious to the fact that I probably already wasn't alone. Afternoon bled to evening, and the sun began to fall below the tree line. Above the canopy, there was still plenty of sunlight, but down where I stood, darkness was already creeping among the trees. That's when I stopped. Seeing the first shadows gave me a sudden realization. I was completely alone in the very woods I had feared, and nightfall was upon me. Realizing this made me feel so small. I wasn't even a speck out here below the darkening treetops. I immediately wanted to go home, just turn around and run back to where I knew was safe. If teleportation were possible, I would have given anything just to be taken back. That's when something else hit me. This was it. I'd always thought I wanted to prove myself like this, to have to brave the wild overnight, without any other options. Now that I was living it, I changed my mind. I panicked a little, but quickly did what all those books and videos had taught me to do. I stopped, took a breath, and thought about my situation. It was not safe to hike back in the dark. The terrain was unfamiliar, and getting lost in these woods would really put my survival skills to the test. Not to mention, the entire time I would be walking in the darkness, my vision would be limited to a small cone of light cast by my flashlight. The idea of something watching me from just beyond the reach of my light scared me shitless. I decided to make camp with what little daylight I had left, and book it home at daybreak. I took off my pack and got to work, clearing some leaves, pitching my tent, and making a safe spot for a fire. That's when I decided to collect firewood to burn throughout the night. Having to venture further and further from a makeshift camp to find sticks, I began to notice something. A wretched, putrid smell. One that took me only a second to identify. Death. This alone shouldn't have bothered me, but I was already on edge. I ran away from that spot as fast as I could without dropping my bundle of sticks. I needed enough wood to have a fire throughout the night. I wanted something to keep the darkness at bay, even if it only afforded me a small pool of light. Now that I had noticed the smell, though, I couldn't shake it. I dropped the sticks off and decided to go in another direction for more firewood. Part of me wishes I hadn't. I noticed the smell getting stronger as I walked in this direction, but it was the only area close to my camp I hadn't scoured. Plus, I needed to know what was in close proximity to me, since I would be sleeping there. That's when I found it. That abomination. Strung up in the trees, almost as a puppet would hang limp from its strings, was a deer. I stared in horror as my brain tried to understand what I was seeing. It was a deer in a damn tree. It just didn't make any sense. I knew some big cats would put their kill in a tree, but there shouldn't have been anything in Mississippi capable of putting a buck of this size in a tree. The more I looked at it, the more sinister the picture became. The deer didn't appear to be eaten at all. It was actually mostly intact, save for one, almost surgical, cut made down its abdomen that allowed its rotting guts to spill all over the place. Noting this, I gagged and nearly puked. I had to look away, but before I did, I noticed one more thing. The damn thing was arranged with purpose. Its head was carefully resting against a branch, as if to keep it looking right where I happened to be standing. It hung vertically, with its back legs crossed, as if it were just sitting there on a large branch. Its front legs, or arms from my perspective, hung outstretched like a person in the anatomical position with their palms facing out. The only thing was that a deer's legs were not meant to be bent in that way. Noticing this, I saw that the joints had been snapped, making its hellish presentation possible. The mangled carcass reeked of decay, and in that moment, I knew I was in danger. I ran back to my tent, knowing it offered me next to no protection. I didn't have enough wood to last the night. At that moment, I broke down. I was too scared to think, to move, to breathe, it seemed. That's when I heard it. The sound that shouldn't exist. A high-pitched screeching rang out through the hills and trees. It sounded nothing like any animal I'd ever heard. I noticed, however, it seemed far off. No doubt it knew where I was, though. I had thought, in that moment, I don't think I will survive the night if I stay here. The only other option, however, was to hike out tonight. It had taken me hours to get this deep into forest, but if I ran, maybe I could make it out faster. Not to mention, what if it catches up with me? Maybe here I could build a fire and keep it at bay. While I was thinking about these things, something happened that made my decision easier. Crack. A stick broke. Somewhere outside my tent, to the rear. It wasn't a loud noise, but it shattered my thoughts like a gunshot. Could that be the creature I had just heard? I suppose it could just as easily be a raccoon or some other nocturnal creature. I listened closely, the air now cool and crisp, as it is this time of year. That's when I realized I heard nothing. Not one bug chirped. Not even the breeze dared to rustle the leaves. I knew that wasn't a good sign. Everyone knows a silent forest means a predator is near. I decided to leave my tent, as it didn't offer me any safety anyways. The only thing I had left to do was build a fire and hope for the best. At this point, I checked my phone, just to confirm what I already knew. No signal. If only that hatchet my mom had gotten me was a zombie apocalypse machine gun or something. I broke sticks down in a kindling to get a fire going, the dry wood taking well to my waterproof matches. Pretty soon, the entire area was cast in a flickering yellow-orange glow. The shadows danced menacingly around me. That's when I heard it. A loud cracking of a tree limb. It sounded like a large branch came crashing down, as if it were blown off a tree in a hurricane. The sound that followed confused me. It was a meaty thud, as if a body had been dropped on the ground. It was at that moment my stomach dropped. My head became heavy as a wave of dread came over me. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the tree where the carcass had been. The mangled deer corpse was gone. This confused and terrified me all at once. Part of me already knew what it meant. That was when I started to hear the most awful noise you will ever hear. A wretched, clicking noise, as if a dozen dislocated joints were all coming to life at once.